Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you another Magic the Gathering video. Today I have an awesome lost story from MTG's history that has only just been brought up again thanks to Commander Legends. We're all probably familiar with the War of the Spark, the multiversal spanning conflict that pitted the Elder Dragon against the Gatewatch and others. A true all-encompassing Planeswalker War, right? But did you know that there was actually an earlier, and I mean much earlier, Planeswalker War? Yes, the War of the Spark was not the first major conflict between Planeswalkers, and with today's video, we'll discuss the very first Planeswalker War. And before we get into the lore, I just want to remind you guys that if you enjoy our content, to consider supporting us over on Patreon. Patrons get a lot of great rewards, such as access to these videos early, and mentions in the credits at the end of the video. So go ahead and check out all the other perks with the link in the description below. And with that, let's get back to the lore. The Commander Legends card that spurred this topic is the first printing of a major character from MTG's storied past, Jared Carthalion, true Heir. A 3/3 legendary human warrior for one of each red, green, and white mana. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent becomes the Monarch. You cannot become the Monarch this turn. If damage would be dealt to this creature while you're the Monarch, prevent that damage and put that many 1/1 counters on Jared Carthalion. A lot of people may not know this character, often confusing him with a more famous Jared in MTG story. But believe me, the Carthalion line plays a major role in the history of Dominaria, and we will learn how Jared Carthalion ended the first ever Planeswalker War. The House of Carth is one of the most ancient and respected families on Dominaria. It was founded by Carth of the Lion way back during the days of Dakin Blackblade. That ancient story is a total saga in and of itself, but from its conclusion, two things were forged that would forever change the fate of Dominaria. Dakin made his now famous Blackblade, and a Carthalion line was founded. From there, the Carthalions would rule the region of Dominaria known as Corondor, but the family didn't always rule with fairness and justice. Like any dynasty, the Carthalions saw their fair share of tyrants and despots, but their name would again gain respect with the rule of Adam Carthalion, who looked to become a planeswalker in order to meet some foretold disastrous fate coming to Dominaria. Heeding the warning of his advisors and plagued by cataclysmic visions, Adam sought out powerful mages in order to prevent this unknown disaster. One such mage was the planeswalker Ravidel, who, without Adam's knowledge, would become the threat he so desperately sought to stifle. Ravidel is the second thread of this story, a loathsome planeswalker with deep-seated hatred and disdain for the multiverse at large. He was mentored by arguably one of the most powerful planeswalkers in MTG history, the ever-complicated character, Taser. He's complicated because his story is so long and winding that he isn't considered exactly a villain or even a neutral character. He exists in this weird gray area, but in regards to his pupil, Ravidel, we can certainly see his more ruthless qualities more fervently expressed. Ravidel, unlike his master, is truly considered a villain because of the way he sees enemies and those who treated him poorly. It was this drive for hatred and revenge on other planeswalkers, including later on even his mentor, that led him to consolidate power on Dominaria and lay the seeds of what would become the Planeswalker War. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To achieve his goal, Ravidel first needed to destabilize the region of Corondor, thus advising very poorly the king, Adam Carthalion. Taking up his advisor role, Ravidel said that he could make the king a planeswalker with the power to stop any potential threat to Dominaria. In doing so, Adam sacrificed his own wife at the advice of Ravidel. However, Adam stopped with the rituals when the planeswalker said he also needed to sacrifice his youngest son. And this is where we see Jared enter the story. Adam refused to lose his son as well, putting him at odds with Ravidel. And that of course leads the two powerful men to fight. Adam wouldn't survive this encounter, and the lands of Corondor fell into chaos without its ancient ruling family. As Jared was orphaned with no way to prove his true identity, Ravidel was quite pleased with himself in this outcome, and went about securing artifacts to further his goal, as a young Jared starved in the streets of Dominaria. Jared grew up a little rough around the edges, turning into a thief and brigand with no real claim to a family title or even a name. Though he did manage at one point to steal a Black Lotus, so hey, a piece of Power 9 in your back pocket, how can you complain, right? Jared's story regarding Ravidel circled back when he began a relationship with the Planeswalker Christina, who saw a latent Planeswalker spark within the young man and had a great untold potential about him. At first, she acted more like a teacher, instructing him on all matters of spells and controlling mana. However, this soon blossomed into an intimate relationship with the two sharing deep-seated emotions. Or maybe she was just attracted to that Black Lotus. We'll never know. As he adventured onward, Jared learned of his true fate and destiny, that he was the true heir of the Carthalion family and protector of Dominaria. Those memories and the hatred for Ravidel rushed back, remembering how this planeswalker murdered his father, stripped him of his life, and now moved to conquer his home. Jared would not let this stand, so he picked up his father's ancient sword, Foecleaver, and looked to face his family's enemy. Ravidel too was making moves at this time, still looking to kill all those who he believed had wronged him in his life. His quest for power led him to obtaining the Silex, a device of mass destruction that you would probably remember triggered the Ice Age following the Brothers' War. This same device, now in Ravidel's possession, meant the scales were tipped in his favor, as the whole continent was essentially being held hostage. He had his finger on the nuclear option here. With the land secured and no credible threat to his rule, Ravidel stepped into his stage 2 of his master plan, summoning his enemies for their executions. Remember, prior to the mending, Planeswalkers weren't just strong, they were basically gods. So Ravidel, who was a Planeswalker himself, needed to be strategic if he hoped to fight and kill more than just one opponent. Enter his ace in the hole, the Mox Beacon. A combination of Moxes, more power 9, that generated a magical energy that acted as a lure for Ravidel's enemies. This Mox Beacon didn't have much of a description to it, other than it tempted in those who had a personal impact on Ravidel's life. So in a sense, it just pulled in any Planeswalker who he felt wronged him. Not much on how that worked, but hey, it was an older story, so give it some slack. But even though we don't know how it works, it does sound very familiar, doesn't it? Yep, this is very similar to what Nicol Bolas used on Ravnica during the War of the Spark, the Interplanar Beacon. Of course, just like the Mox Beacon, the Interplanar Beacon lured and trapped Planeswalkers on Ravnica for Bolas to then, well, kill. Even before that though, we had Ravidel do the same exact thing, with the same expected results. With the plan set and Jared on his way to defeat his enemy and reclaim his birthright, the first Planeswalker War began. Ravidel activated the beacon, friends and foes alike, from all across the multiverse, namely 6 impactful Planeswalkers, all appeared on Dominaria at once. Now, the original plan was to suck in Ravidel's enemies, have them fight one another, or even fight Jared, weakening and tiring themselves enough so that Ravidel could swoop in and finish off the survivors. This was supposed to happen because the beacon attracted enemies and former allies of Ravidel, meaning there was a split between heroic characters and villains. But as an unexpected consequence, rather than an all-out every-man-for-himself war, lines were drawn, sides were taken, and Jared Carthalion led the heroes against the villains who were led by Ravidel. This was the entire basis for the titanic Planeswalker War. In this epic bout, Jared witnesses the suspected death of his love, Christina, falls into a complete rage of despair, and fights Ravidel one-on-one, with Jared successfully springing a trap on the Planeswalker, which sees the villain fall into his apparent death. Ravidel is never seen again, Christina is revealed to be fine, and Jared claims a mortal life with his love as the savior of his family's land. An unsung hero on Dominaria during a time of great strife that would forever be known as the First Planeswalker War. Now, admittedly, this is a very brief overview of what that conflict was, as I attempt to make this video more centered around Jared Carthalion himself, as we're trying to examine the stories based on new cards in Commander Legends. However, I will say that this conflict was an obvious inspiration for the War of the Spark that was to follow. While both occur in the same multiverse, essentially in the same canon, I believe the War of the Spark was actually more of a popular retelling of Jared's story in the Planeswalker War than it was its own original idea. This story was printed in a running comic series, and outside of hardcore players who were really invested in the story, a very limited number of modern fans have ever really heard of it. Characters like Jared hadn't even been printed on cards before today, and that's despite the great impact they had on the early story. So while the War of the Spark saga may have been in production for a long time, I think in the back of Wizards of the Coast's minds, they wanted to pay homage to the real Planeswalker War that people had forgotten about. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for this video on the life, history, and design of Jared Carthalion, true heir, and the first ever Planeswalker War. Now I want you to let me know in the comments below how you plan to use this card in a commander deck. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you show your support by leaving it a like, subscribing, and ticking that notification bell so you never miss out on a new video's release. You can also check out all the great perks you can get by supporting us over on Patreon. Find that link in the description below. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!